Black Janitor noticed the symptoms everyone ignored and ended up saving the life of the millionaire so midnight inside Manhattan Tower. Fluorescent lights hum softly above rows of deserted desks. The only sound is the squeak of a mop bucket. Rolling across polished marble, James Washington moves quietly through the silence, the way only a janitor can. For most of the world, he doesn't exist, an invisible man in a glass empire. But tonight, his world is heavier than usual. The memory of Dorothy, his late wife, lingers with him. She was a neurology nurse, sharp and compassionate, the kind of woman who saw people others ignored. She taught him things he never imagined he would need. At 3:07 a.m., James pushes open the heavy glass door of the executive boardroom. Inside, the skyline glitters through floor-to-ceiling windows. But the view is shattered by something far more urgent. Victoria Sterling, the powerful CEO of Manhattan Tower, is slumped in her chair. Her skin is pale, her right arm limp, words caught in her throat. James freezes, just for a second. Then Dorothy's voice echoes in his mind. Act fast. Every second matters. His hand steady. He dials 911, reports the stroke, follows instructions, and positions her safely. By the time paramedics arrive, her pulse is stabilizing. As the sirens fade into the night, James stands alone in the vast boardroom. The floor is clean, the city is alive, but something has shifted. Saving her life was only the beginning. What James doesn't know is that he has just stepped into the center of a storm that could destroy everything. The morning sun cut through the skyscraper glass, spilling gold over Manhattan Tower's marble floors. Workers arrived with coffee cups and tired eyes, but James Washington had been there since before dawn. His shift never ended with the sunrise. He moved quietly, polishing chrome and emptying bins, as if the events of last night had been nothing more than a bad dream. Except they were real. He had seen Victoria Sterling collapse. He had steadied her breathing. He had kept her alive until the paramedics carried her away. For a brief moment, James thought that what he had done mattered, that someone might notice by 7 o'clock. That illusion was gone. When James opened his dented locker in the basement corridor, a folded piece of paper slid out and landed at his feet. His calloused fingers unfolded it slowly. The message was written in thick black ink, short and sharp. Stay quiet, janitor. Accidents happen. His throat tightened. The words bled with menace. Someone had been watching. The first shadow revealed itself minutes later. Wilson Carter, head of security, was waiting near the service elevator. Tall, broad, and always in a tailored suit, Wilson carried authority like a weapon. His eyes locked on James with a cold stare that lingered too long, as if weighing him like a threat. No words were spoken. None were needed. The message in James's locker now had a face behind it. Later that morning, James was summoned to the executive floor. The request came under the pretense of formal thanks. He expected to see Victoria Sterling, or at least hear how she was recovering. Instead, he was met by Dr. Charles Patterson, the company's physician. Dr. Patterson wore a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. His handshake was soft, his voice smooth, yet every word carried the sting of superiority. You acted quickly, Patterson said, adjusting his glasses. Remarkable instincts for someone in your position. James shifted uncomfortably. The tone was not gratitude. It was dismissal wrapped in politeness. Patterson continued, lowering his voice. Victoria is stable, but her health requires delicate management. I oversee her regimen, her supplements, her care, which means what happened last night should remain between us. The board prefers discretion. Gossip, you understand, can hurt reputations. The doctor's words pressed against James like invisible hands. He heard what was not being said. Do not talk. Do not ask questions. Forget what you saw. When James left the office, the hallway felt narrower, the walls closer. Gratitude had turned to suspicion. Fear traced every step he took. He had saved a life, but instead of being honored, he was being watched, warned, and cornered. As the day dragged on, James felt the weight of invisible eyes. Wilson Carter's presence shadowed him near the loading dock. Dr. Patterson's words echoed in his head. The note in his locker burned in his pocket. What had begun as an act of compassion was twisting into something darker. James Washington, the man who kept floors clean and lights shining, had stumbled into secrets powerful enough to end careers or lives, and those secrets were closing in on him. Fear pressed heavy on James Washington, but he was no stranger to silence. He had lived most of his life unseen, moving through polished halls like a shadow. The note in his locker told him one thing: if he kept his head down, he might survive. But the thought of walking away, of ignoring what he had witnessed, burned inside him. He could not. James understood something others did not. Invisibility was not weakness. Invisibility could be a weapon. Nobody noticed the janitor. Nobody asked what he saw, where he walked, or what he overheard. That made him dangerous. That night, as the last executives left the building and the skyscraper fell quiet, James made his choice. He would not retreat. He would watch. He would learn. In the maintenance tunnels, he found Marcus Bennett. Marcus was an HVAC technician, built with the solid frame of a man who had carried more than tools in his life. The faded tattoo on his forearm hinted at a military past. His record had shadows, fights, unpaid debts, but his loyalty to James was unwavering. Years ago, James had covered for him when a supervisor threatened his job. Marcus had never forgotten. When James explained the note, the cold eyes of Wilson Carter and the condescending smile of Dr. Patterson, Marcus leaned back against a boiler pipe and let out a low whistle. "They want you silent because you saw something," Marcus said. "If they are scared, then they are hiding something. We can find it." Together, they devised a plan. The building was wired with security cameras, but none in the places that mattered: the private offices, the medical cabinets, the boardroom. Corners where whispers carried more weight than votes. Marcus knew the ducts and vents better than anyone. James knew the cleaning schedules, the blind spots, the moments when the skyscraper slept. For 2 weeks, they worked in silence, speaking little, communicating with nods and glances. Hidden cameras the size of coins slipped behind bookcases. Microphones were tucked beneath polished tables. Marcus rewired ducts to carry tiny cables that no eye would catch. The skyscraper, once their prison, was becoming their net. And then the recordings began to speak. The first was from Dr. Patterson's office. At midnight, his smooth voice filled the tiny speaker Marcus had rigged in the basement. "Her doses are holding," Patterson said. Papers shuffled in the background. "The toxins are small, undetectable. By the time symptoms worsen, it will appear natural. A slow decline, nothing to trace." James froze. His jaw tightened. The doctor was not healing Victoria Sterling. He was poisoning her. The second discovery came from the boardroom. Wilson Carter's voice, clipped and cold, carried through the microphone beneath the mahogany table. "The stock drops every time Sterling cancels appearances," Carter said. "Our partners sell low. I buy through proxies. When she returns, it spikes, and the profit is clean. Nobody questions it. As long as she stays weak, the game continues." The puzzle came together with cruel clarity. Victoria was not just a patient. She was the key to a fortune. Her health controlled the company's value, and Patterson and Carter were pulling the strings, slowly killing her to control the market. James sat in silence, the weight of truth crushing him. He was only a janitor, a man who pushed brooms and emptied bins. But now he carried secrets powerful enough to topple giants. The danger sharpened point one night. While retrieving a recording from Patterson's medical cabinet, James felt the floor vibrate with approaching footsteps. A flashlight beam cut through the dark hallway. Night security, his heart pounded. The tiny recorder burned in his palm as he slipped into the nearest supply closet. He pressed his back against the wall, holding his breath. The guard's boots stopped outside the door. The knob rattled once, twice. James closed his eyes. If the door opened, it would end here. But then, a voice on the radio crackled. "East. Wing check complete. Move to the lobby." The boots retreated. The light faded. James exhaled slowly, his body trembling with relief. He had escaped by seconds. Later, Marcus found him in the boiler room, sweat still dripping down his forehead. "They nearly caught me," James whispered. Marcus gave a grim nod. "That is because they know someone is watching. We have to be faster, smarter. But now we have proof. You are holding fire in your hands." The recordings piled up, each one darker than the last. Patterson's measured instructions on dosages. Carter's calculated trades and coded calls. The empire was built on lies, greed, and poison, and James Washington, invisible janitor, was the one pulling the curtain back. The game had changed. What began as survival was now war. The silence of Manhattan Tower was deceptive. By day, the skyscraper roared with the hum of ambition, but by night it swallowed secrets whole. James Washington understood this truth better than anyone. For years, he had walked its hallways unseen, a figure who blended with shadows. Now that invisibility was his greatest weapon, the investigation had reached a dangerous stage. Hidden cameras and microphones were collecting pieces of a puzzle too dark to ignore. Still, James knew evidence meant nothing unless someone powerful enough to act could see it. And there was only one person who mattered, Victoria Sterling. But she was both victim and potential ally, poisoned daily by the people closest to her. If he revealed himself too soon, he would be crushed. If he waited too long, she would die. James made a choice. He typed an anonymous message on an old typewriter he kept in his storage closet. No fingerprints, no handwriting, just words sharp as glass. Test your supplements. Your life depends on it. He sealed the note in a plain envelope and slipped it into the stack of morning correspondence that passed through Victoria's private assistant. To everyone else, it was just another piece of mail. To her, it was a lifeline. When Victoria read the note later that morning, her hand froze. Her instincts told her to ignore it, but something inside her whispered otherwise. She had grown weaker in recent months, her speech sometimes slurred, her balance unsteady, her mind clouded when decisions mattered most. Doctors had called it stress, age, exhaustion, but the letter's sharp urgency would not leave her mind. She quietly ordered her supplements sent to a private lab under a false name. Days later, the results confirmed the unthinkable. The capsules she trusted were laced with toxic microdoses, building slowly in her bloodstream. It was not stress. It was not age. It was murder in slow motion. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her. She told no one of the results, not even her closest advisors. Instead, she began to watch. She noticed how Dr. Patterson always smiled too warmly when handing her pills. She noticed how Wilson Carter hovered near every doorway she entered, his eyes sharper than a bodyguard's should be. Meanwhile, the walls of the conspiracy began to shake. Patterson sensed something had changed. His hands trembled when he measured out the capsules. His cheerful confidence gave way to paranoia. He double-checked doors. He whispered to himself during rounds. Wilson Carter noticed too. The head of security grew restless, convinced that someone inside the tower was pulling threads behind their backs. He doubled surveillance, installed new cameras, and ordered stricter patrols. The noose was tightening on both sides. For James, the risk grew heavier each night. He knew Victoria now understood the danger, but exposing the truth required proof strong enough to bring down both Patterson and Carter. A single test result would not be enough. He needed recordings, ledgers, and physical samples. He needed to make their crimes undeniable. That meant pushing deeper. James began retrieving vials from medical cabinets, sliding them into his cleaning cart under layers of rags. He copied financial ledgers Carter thought were locked away. His old grief gave him courage. Dorothy had spent her life saving others through knowledge and care. James would honor her by using what she taught him, but danger stalked closer. One night, Marcus Bennett almost paid the price for their mission. While checking a hidden camera in an air vent, he was caught by Carter in the server room. Carter's eyes narrowed like a predator's. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Marcus forced a grin, playing the part of a careless technician. "Cooling system check. You want your servers fried." He waved his tools as proof. For a moment, Carter's suspicion cut like a blade. But then he stepped back, muttering, "Watch yourself." Marcus walked away with his heart hammering in his chest. When he told James what happened, the janitor understood the stakes more clearly than ever. They were one mistake away from being buried. Still, there was no turning back. The pieces of truth were almost complete. Soon, the question would not be whether Victoria could survive, but whether justice could reach the men who had plotted her slow death. And James Washington knew the next move had to be his boldest yet. The city lights outside Manhattan Tower burned like 1,000 restless eyes. Inside, the building was quiet, but James Washington could feel the weight of every secret pressing down on him. The evidence he had gathered was enough to shake the tower to its foundation. Vials, ledgers, recordings, Test results. Proof of greed, betrayal, and slow murder. But with proof came danger. James stood at a crossroads he could no longer avoid. If he spoke out, he would risk everything: his job, his freedom, perhaps even his life. Carter's men would come for him. Patterson would silence him before the truth spread. The powerful had long hands and long memories. If he stayed silent, corruption would win. Victoria Sterling would die slowly, never knowing the faces of those who had betrayed her. The empire she built would fall into poisoned hands, and James would have to live with the knowledge that he could have stopped it but chose not to. The choice was brutal, but it was no longer abstract. It was flesh and blood, poison and paper, life and death. That night, in the dim corner of his small apartment, James pulled out Dorothy's old notebook. It was worn, the pages softened by years of use. He opened it and saw her handwriting, steady and graceful, marking passages of wisdom she used to repeat to him. And then he heard her voice in his memory. James, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what you do when fear is staring you in the face. He closed his eyes. He remembered her laughter, her gentle rebukes, her firm belief that knowledge was meant to protect, not to profit. He remembered the day she died, the hospital error that took her away, and the vow he made at her graveside, to never let injustice stand unchallenged if he had the power to fight it. That Dorothy's voice rose again in his heart. If you know the truth, and you can stop harm, then silence makes you guilty too. James breathed deeply. The fear remained, but it no longer held him. The decision was made that he began to assemble everything into a single master dossier. He copied documents, organized recordings, and labeled files with clear notes. Every piece of evidence had to tell the story without him needing to speak. If they came for him, the truth would still find its way. 4 envelopes were prepared. One marked for the FBI, financial crimes and conspiracy. One for the SEC, illegal trading and corporate fraud. One for the State Medical Board, malpractice, poisoning, and breach of duty. And one for the investigative press, those fearless reporters who thrived on exposing corruption no matter how high it reached. It took him the whole night. By dawn, the evidence lay on his small kitchen table, neat and undeniable. James stared at it, feeling the gravity of what he had done. Tomorrow, this would leave his hands. Tomorrow, the empire built on lies would tremble. But tomorrow was not promised. That evening, he returned to Manhattan Tower for his shift, carrying the same mop and bucket that made him invisible. He moved through the empty offices with quiet precision, but his eyes lingered longer than usual. He knew this could be the last time he saw these walls. When he reached the boardroom, he paused. The room was immaculate, yet he still wiped the long polished table slowly, as if the act itself carried meaning. This was where deals were struck, where fortunes were made and destroyed, where lives had been played like chess pieces. Tomorrow, this room would no longer belong to the men who had ruled it with poison and greed. James stood in the silence, his reflection faint in the glass windows. He whispered softly, as if Dorothy herself were standing beside him. "Tomorrow, I will not. Be silent." He placed his rag back into the bucket and looked one final time at the towering city beyond the glass. He had chosen his path. The fear was real, but so was the resolve. When he walked out of the boardroom that night, James Washington carried no more doubt, only destiny. The morning of the emergency board meeting arrived heavy with tension. Manhattan Tower loomed against the Saturday sky, its glass windows reflecting clouds that seemed ready to break. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with unease. Executives whispered in low tones, confused about why Victoria Sterling had called such a sudden gathering. At the head of the long boardroom table sat Wilson Carter, trying to project calm authority. Beside him, Dr. Richard Patterson shuffled papers, his face tight with worry. They didn't know the storm that was about to descend. The doors burst open. A team of agents in dark suits swept into the room. The lead agent flashed a badge, FBI. Moments later, another group followed, SEC investigators. The entire board froze. Wilson Carter. Dr. Richard Patterson, the agent announced, his voice sharp. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, securities fraud, medical malpractice, and attempted murder." The room exploded in gasps. Executives pushed back their chairs, eyes wide. Watching the empire they had pledged loyalty to unravel in seconds. Carter's face drained of color. "This is absurd," he barked, rising to his feet. "You have no proof." The agent dropped a thick folder onto the table. Inside were the documents, recordings, financial ledgers, and lab results James had prepared. The evidence was ironclad. Patterson stammered, his voice breaking. You can't do this. I'm a doctor." Two agents stepped forward, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. Carter struggled, shouting threats, but his voice only echoed hollowly against the glass walls as the FBI dragged him out. The mighty had fallen, and they fell hard. The executives sat in stunned silence. The men they had feared and obeyed were gone in an instant, exposed and disgraced. Then the door opened again. Victoria Sterling entered, her presence commanding. The room, though still recovering, her strength was visible in every step. She faced her board with calm authority. "You've witnessed today the consequences of corruption," she said firmly. "This company was built on vision, trust, and responsibility. But some among us betrayed that trust. They tried to poison not just me, but everything Sterling Enterprises stands for." No one dared speak. Victoria continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "From this day forward, there will be reforms. Integrity will no longer be optional. It will be our foundation. And to ensure that, I am appointing a new director of corporate safety and integrity." The executives exchanged glances. Who could it be? The doors opened once more. James Washington stepped inside, not with a mop and bucket, but in a tailored suit, standing tall. His presence was calm yet powerful, his dignity impossible to ignore. "James Washington," Victoria announced. "The man whose courage and integrity saved this company, and saved me." A ripple of disbelief moved through the boardroom. Some executives looked ashamed. Others lowered their eyes, unable to face him. James stood steady, no longer invisible, no longer a shadow in the room. Cameras flashed as Victoria later addressed the press outside the tower. Reporters shouted questions, but her message was clear. Sterling Enterprises will lead with integrity. And this man beside me, James Washington, embodies that principle. James did not speak much. He didn't need to. His quiet strength told the story better than words. True intelligence isn't about titles or degrees. It's about courage, integrity, and character. The world remembers not those who stayed silent, but those who dared to stand when silence was easier.